14.52, the concluding verse of the 14th canto of the epic poem Saundarananda by Ashvaghosha. If, abiding in an empty place, he loves ever to be one, if he fools around with the risings of afflictions no more than he does with enemies, and if, going around enjoying his own self, he drinks the water of grace, then the facility he enjoys is greater than the sovereignty of Indra over the 30 others. In Sanskrit, it's in the, again, another one of the series of 6 verses I'm going through in the Śikhariṇī meter. So it's short, long, 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 short, 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 long, long, short, 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 long. Vasañ śūnyāgāre, yadi satatam eko bhiramate, yadi kleśotpādaiḥ, saha ramate śatrubhir iva, carann ātmārāmo yadi pibati, prīti-salilaṁ, tato bhuṅkte śreṣṭhaṁ, tridaśa-pati-rājyād sukham. So, as I said before, these 3 verses, 50, 51, 52, at the end of the canto, and much of the canto itself is about the 3rd of the 8 thoughts of a great person, praviveka, seclusion, separateness. But every one of the 8 is only really understood in light of all the others, and especially the number 8, nisprapañcā, not othering. Not othering is another way of saying abiding in emptiness, and that is suggested in the first words of the verse, vasañ śūnyāgāre, abiding in an empty place. So there's a stock phrase in the Pali Suttas where the Buddha speaks of a bhikkhu, ida rahula bhikkhu aranyagato va, rukamula gato va, śūnyāgāre gato va. So a bhikkhu aranyagato va, going to the forest, going to the wilderness, aranya. Rukamula gato va, or va, going, gato, to the root of a tree, rukamula. Or, third of the 3, śūnyāgāre gato va, shunya, empty, agara, place, so going to an empty place. So that suggests a deserted place. So the ostensible meaning, again, it's all about, which Ashvaghosha has referred to, the importance of secluding oneself physically as an aid to gaining seclusion of the mind. And that is the ostensible meaning, and that meaning is true. But as with all Ashvaghosha's poetry, the more you dig, the deeper you realise his intention is. So, for example, E.H. Johnston, the distinguished Sanskrit Oxford scholar of 100 years ago, he translates the first line, if he continually rejoices living alone in a deserted place. So he's translated it śūnyāgāre, a deserted place, and eko, which literally means one, it literally means alone as well. Johnston translated that as alone. And then another Oxford scholar following Johnson nearly 100 years later, Linda Coville. Her translation is very nice. It's a Clay Sanskrit Library edition. It's a very handy little book you can hold in your hands, and you've got the English on one side, the Sanskrit on the other. Her translation, if he's glad to always live alone in a deserted spot. So basically, same as E.H. Johnson. If he's always glad to live alone, alone is eko, deserted spot, śūnyāgāre. But what Asvaghosha is really talking about, this whole verse becomes meaningful in light of emptiness. All the Buddha's teachings are connected with emptiness, and it's nowhere more apparent than in this verse. And actually, over the last few days, having been reflecting on the deeper meaning of this verse, I actually changed the way I've translated it. I didn't understand it in light of emptiness when I first translated it like 15 years ago, and I didn't understand that it's when Mike Latchford and I published the revised edition of Asvaghosha's Gold last year, about a year ago. There wasn't time to, or I didn't have the inclination to redo everything. But if I had limitless time and resources and energy, I would go back and retranslate everything I've ever translated in light of emptiness. Shobogenzo totally, and Asvaghosha too. That's one reason I'm taking my time about translating MMK. I don't want to do another translation that as soon as I've translated it and published it, I start realising all the holes that there are in it, because I didn't translate it in light of emptiness. And so even if I understand emptiness now, it's like a verse we're going to do in Canto 16. There's a line that says, Param dharmam jnatva yad upari nivasham nalabante. If, though he knows the supreme Dharma, he does not win a higher repose. So the suggestion there is, okay, so now, thanks to Nagarjuna, we understand the supreme Dharma, the supreme teaching of emptiness. But to understand it is one thing. To actually live by it is another. And so the first line here says, yadi satatam, if always, if constantly, if ever. Eko, one or alone, or an individual. Bhiramate means both to dwell, and it also means to, ram means to enjoy. The verbal root ram means to enjoy. And sometimes has a sexual connotation, as we'll see in the second line. So again, if we see how Johnson translated it, he continually rejoices living alone. And Linda Coville, glad to always live alone. So bhiramate, bhiram can mean to dwell and to delight in. Includes both those meanings. If abiding in an empty place, he loves ever to be one. So, because I want to emphasize the importance of making a stand against collectivism as an individual, I wanted to bring that out by translating this somehow as an individual. If he loves ever to be an individual, if he dwells as an individual, if he delights in it being a unitary individual, something like that. But over the last couple of days, no, Eko literally means one. It's if you want to say 1, 2, 3, is Eka, Divi, etc. So, the most sort of straight literal translation is just to translate Eko as one, and it has, in light of emptiness, that meaning is most important, rather than sort of having this agenda of battering the point about the individual. In light of emptiness, what's less important than being an individual is letting oneness happen, or put it another way, to prevent division happening, to prevent a division which is not originally there. So, if abiding in an empty place, he loves ever to be one. See, what we're really up against is the empire of lies goes through its death throes in its war against Russia, in its desire to grab all those Eurasian natural resources. The empire of lies uses othering. It's one of its main tactics of divide and rule. Other, demonize the other, whether it's Vladimir Putin or whether it's getting everybody on separate sides of the trans debate or Israel Gaza or whatever. They just love to divide, and they use othering to do it. So the essence of being one, you could say, is not othering, nishprapañcā. And nishprapañcā means always, satatam, constantly, abiding in emptiness. So it means 24 hours a day. You don't fall into othering, but we're deeply, deeply conditioned to other. See, even science, in a way, it's othering what happens. What we call the physical universe is basically the othering of what's unfathomably happening. So we other the universe and then study it as if it's out there before our eyes. And in so doing, we neglect what's between our ears. So he loves ever to be one means to understand that, but also to actually act it out. So one way you act it out is by giving things unselfishly, which Gudo Nishijima, my old Zen teacher, he was very good at that. He was very generous, but at the same time, his understanding of emptiness was not as clear as what's emerging from the ancient texts. So, for example, towards the end of his life, basically, he generously gave away what didn't belong to him. And that was bad karma. But the root of it was a kind of selfishness. That I did it all by myself. That was grounded in a lack of understanding of emptiness. We'll talk about that when we come to the third line. But I've been reflecting on it the last couple of days, and it's a very high bar to constantly loving ever to be one. and not loving a little bit of sinking to the level of objectifying, and especially othering those people who get on our nerves, or those. Even if we're talking about the empire of lies, the people I follow, that I've learned their version of history, which seems to be much truer than the official narrative. They tend to hate Anthony Fauci and particularly Bill Gates and Benjamin Netanyahu. So just as the Empire of Lies demonizes Vladimir Putin, people against the Empire of Lies will demonize Tony Blair. But that's also othering. And at the same time, you've got people like, say, Nick Hudson, chairman of Pan Data, or Denny Rancourt in Canada, excellent thinkers, but they're still looking at the data. They're very much data focused. So, and they talk about complexity, complex systems. See, in light of emptiness, it's not that there are systems which are characterized by complex interactions between A and B. In light of emptiness, there is no separate A, no separate B. A and B A is empty of A but full of B, and B is empty of B but full of A. So it's a much more radical, really, to not other is a big ask, and it's unfathomable, really, what could happen if this news gets out. This 2,500-year-old news. Second line. Yadi if kleśotpādaiḥ, the arisings of kleśa. So kleśa means affliction or afflictions, could be singular or plural in a compound. The arisings of afflictions. Saha with ramate. So that's that verb ram again. So he doesn't enjoy ramate, negative, ramate. He doesn't enjoy. So śatrubhir, with enemies, eva like. So if eva is used with a negative, it means no more than. It can mean no more than. So he doesn't enjoy, if we translate ramate as enjoy, he doesn't enjoy the arisings of afflictions any more than enemies. So, as I said before, ram sometimes carries a sexual connotation, and actually E.H. Johnson noticed that, and he wrote there, if he avoids intercourse with the sources of sin as if they were enemies. So he put the negative with the verb, ramate, he translated he avoids. You could translate he's not fond of. So ram with the instrumental, which is utpādaiḥ, is instrumental, it means to be fond of. So you could say, that's how I translated before, if he's no fonder of arisings of afflictions than he is of enemies. That's how Linda Colville translated it. If he has as little liking for the sources of defilement as for an enemy. But E.H. Johnson went, if he avoids intercourse with the sources of sin as if they were enemies. So there's a kind of an allusion there to sexual intercourse, possibly. And so when I went back to the dictionary, ram, to delight, make happy, enjoy carnally, to be glad or pleased, rejoice at, delight in, be fond of, with the instrumental, is what we got here. So be fond of would be perfectly literal. But to play or sport, dally, have sexual intercourse with, instrumental with or without saha. So that's what we've got here, saha, with. So what's Asvaghosha, the cunning old devil? What is he actually suggesting below the surface here? If we kind of, as the human mind is ever prone to do, pick up on the sexual connotation, it occurred to me that as I reflected on this, first of all, what Asvaghosha is describing in the whole of Saundarananda is working to a principle. In Sanskrit, he uses the word vidivat, with principle, with the rule. So, or in a verse we're going to do in a couple of verses' time, Nayam Śrutva Shakto, a capable person, Shakto, Śrutva, hearing, Nayam, the plan. So I translate that kind of a bit poetically, when a capable man hears the plan. So there's a plan, we're working to a plan. And what we're not doing in that is fucking around and finding out. Well, there might be a time for fucking around and finding out. But when you get to the supreme dharma, that's no time for fucking around and finding out. It's a time for working to a plan. And so on one level, that's how I started thinking about this second line. If he fools around with arisings of afflictions no more than he does with enemies. So that makes sense. You think about it. You see, one of the virtues in someone who devoted to the three divisions of Shila, Samadhi, Prajna. Again, in Canto 16, Asvaghosha describes how Ashyopachare, attendant on abandoning the faults through the eightfold path of Shila, Samadhi, Prajna. Attendant on that is alpechata, wanting little, tushti, contentment, praviviktata, separateness, seclusion. But he also says, hrir, humility, apramadaha. So, pramad comes from the verbal root mad, which is used to describe like an elephant in rut, intoxication, lust, kind of getting carried away with emotion. So, is negative, apramada, it's like not being silly, not getting carried away, not going too far. My grandmother always used to say about Michael always goes too far. And so I was reflecting on this in terms of like not being, what does it mean? Not trying to be right. If we're not careful, we kind of can go to the other extreme and kind of fuck around with going wrong, if that's making sense. It's like throwing away. So Shila Vrat Upadana is the third obstacle that prevents us entering the stream. Clinging to Shila, to virtue and Vrata vows. But not clinging to virtue and vows doesn't necessarily mean kind of going around having too much fun, put it that way. I mean, Marjorie Barlow, first words I ever heard Marjorie say were at a lecture in Birmingham, 1995. Shall I tell you something, she said. The Alexander work is supposed to be fun. She was making the point right from the beginning. It's not about trying to be right. It's not around going around with serious faces the whole time, grimly trying to be right. but it's probably I've got a tendency to, in following that, taking it too far the other way, like almost kind of, well, fooling around with the rising of afflictions, put it like that. You could say that, you know, if you get angry, that's nothing to be, it's not about trying not to be something, but if the afflictions or defilements are like enemies, then how is the best way to treat them? You don't want to fool around with enemies, do you? If enemies are out there, they really want to kill you, those kind of enemies, then you don't want to fool around with them. You want to take them without being too serious about things. You want to give them due attention. So apramada, sometimes it's translated attentiveness. You've got to keep your eyes on your enemies. Keep your friends close and keep your enemies closer still. That kind of attitude. So that's one way of understanding the second line. If we translate ramate as not fooling around, not fucking around and finding out. But then at a deeper level, again, in light of emptiness, in light of Nagarjuna's teaching, we're getting really deep into the weeds here, aren't we? In MMK, I think it's canto 17 or 18, chapter 17 or 18. we call MMK chapters because it's not so poetic. Asphaghosa's stuff is real epic poetry with these fancy meters and so on at the end. So we call those cantos, but MMK is just sort of more prosaic, written in the 32-syllable anustubi verse, anustub, which is 4 padas of 8 syllables each, and it never deviates from that. So it's more sort of dry, just clarifying what needs to be clarified. So there's a verse there that says, karma-kleśa-kṣayān mokṣaḥ, karma-kleśā vikalpataḥ, te prapañcāt, prapañcas tu, śūnyātāyāṃ nirudhyate, karma-kleśa-kṣayān mokṣaḥ, from the fading away, from the ending of karma and kleśa, so karma and afflictions. See, karma and afflictions are 2 of the groups that, in the dependent arising of suffering, the 3-way classification is karma-kleśa and dukkha. So karma is samskara and bhava, that's action or karma. Then kleśa is avidya, trishna, upadana, ignorance, clinging, ignorance, thirsting and clinging. So that's 5, and then the other 7 are all dukkha. So it's interesting, he's not saying that dukkha is a construct or an imagining. So karma-kleśa-kṣayān mokṣaḥ is liberation. So from the ending of karma and kleśa, there is liberation. So ostensibly, it's like the first meaning of the second line. So we want to get rid of kleśa. We don't want to fuck around with the risings of afflictions. That's serious business. They're our enemies. So we want to deal with them in a serious manner. That's what it seems to be saying there in that first pada. Then this is what makes you think. Then he says, karma-kleśa vikalpataḥ. So taha is ablative suffix, so it's from vikalpa. And vikalpa means imagining or making it up, constructing. So karma and kleśa are through making shit up. So he's not saying, in fact, in the second line, he's suggesting that there is no karma and no kleśa that we have to get rid of. The suffering, he's not denying the reality of suffering, but he's kind of inviting us to think, what does he mean? What is karma? What is kleśa? And again, because you see, this is how we have to start thinking in light of emptiness. In light of emptiness, it's not that there is karma or there are afflictions. Not as separately existing things. So in that light, we think, what did Asvaghos actually say? Kleśotpādaiḥ means the happening of afflictions, the arising of afflictions. Or, so that means like anger happening. Or it could mean what's really happening is we're making up, like anger is a problem. We're turning it into an issue, you know. Like everything's an issue, isn't it, these days? If you happen to catch Woman's Hour on BBC Radio 4, somebody with some issue or other that has arisen through vikalpa, making shit up, you know, through prapañcāt, in other words, othering, objectifying things. So, in that case, not fooling around with arising of afflictions, it means, in light of emptiness, it could mean not othering, not even othering the faults, the afflictions, the defilements. Any more than you would other enemies. So again, this is sort of then we begin to touch on that aspect of the Buddha's teaching which Jesus, I believe, picked up, which is, you know, loving your enemy as your friend. Or in the Tibetan tradition, you know, there's when you enter the sangha, I heard that there's a kind of a part in the ceremony where you light some incense for your enemies because they're your best teachers. So that's like keeping your enemies close in perhaps a deeper sense. It's revering your enemies for what they've got to teach you. Right, I haven't really clarified that as well as I could, but hopefully I've opened it up for deeper investigation. If he fools around with arising of afflictions, no more than he does with enemies. Carann ātmārāmo yadi ca pibati prīti-salilaṁ. So carann means going. Ātmārāmo, atma self, arama, again that verbal root ram, to enjoy. So ātmārāmo, we had it in a verse couple of verses ago. It means enjoying the self, rejoicing in the self. Is a more sort of a E.H. Johnson style translation, rejoicing in the self. It sounds like a sort of 19th century hymn. Or more colloquially, in modern English, we would just say enjoying oneself, enjoying himself. Linda Cole translated, he lives in self-sufficiency. Well, that is an even more modern translation. E.H. Johnson translated, if living sufficient to himself. Okay, so they missed out the enjoyment part. Not sure how they got that. So I've translated, thinking about what it means, carann, going or going around. Remembered Marjorie Barlow's words. We're all going around the whole time trying to be right. We're all going around the whole time trying to be right. Now, the alternative to that would be going around the whole time having fun, enjoying oneself, not trying to be right. So that's why I went with going around. if going around enjoying his own self. I added own because I wanted to bring out the contrast with others that I used in the fourth line. So, if going around enjoying his own self. Okay, so it's suggestive of a kind of a carefree, not trying to be right. In light of emptiness, there is no such thing as being right. So to me, this line's suggesting that at the beginning, a kind of carefreeness in light of emptiness. There's no such thing as being right. So let's just go around enjoying ourselves, enjoying even going wrong. But then the second line, if we understand carann ātmārāmo like that, what does he mean by yadi pibati prīti-salilaṁ? Yadi, if, and if, pibati, he drinks. Prīti means joy or bliss, or grace. Sometimes it means grace. Sometimes grace seems to hit the target for me. And here in particular, prīti-sukham tend to go together. So joy and ease, or grace and ease. We've got sukham is the last word of the verse. So prīti-salilaṁ, the water of grace. So if you don't really think about it and just sort of do it poetically, E.H. Johnson went with drinks the water of ecstasy. Linda Coville drinks the water of bliss. So it's not really deeply thinking about what it means. It just sounds kind of poetic. When you actually think about it in context, there's always this balance. It's we're going around enjoying ourselves, but if there's āpramada, if there's an attentiveness, if there's not an over exuberance about that, and not getting carried away, if you think about it, it's like Master Dogen said, we should ask ourselves in the dojos of the Buddhist patriarchs, is there water? Sounds a funny question. Nishijima Roshi, of course, he loved that question because it's pointing at being realistic. Of course, the answer is a definite yes. It's not like a yes or no. Yes, there bloody well is. You know, there's no Buddhist patriarch has ever managed to live in a dojo without water. We need water. We can think about emptiness, going around, enjoying ourselves, not trying to be right, etc., etc. But the truth is, we actually depend on water. We can talk about being an individual, emphasizing individual effort, but really, we're nothing without water. We're dependent on water. In light of emptiness, human life is dependent on water. The free life of a monk, a bhikkhu, like say in Thailand, there's a freedom there in taking the robe. So much is taken care of for you by lay people who, you know, provide you food and cook it for you, so you can get on with your practice. So it's a very free life. It can be if you're cut out for it. But that freedom to be an individual is totally dependent on the support of lay people. So this is the kind of the paradox that's there. Emptiness, in light of emptiness, we can really delve into what it means to be separate, to be separated from conditioning, to be separated from othering, from clinging. But when we are separate like that, we see what we're totally dependent on. And the best example of that is water. So that's why I think that's what this is really getting at. It's like kind of inviting us to be inflated, you know. I want to be an individual in light of emptiness, to be a strong individual making my own individual effort, and I'm going to go around having fun the whole time, not trying to be right, just going around enjoying myself. But that said, yadi cha pibati prīti-salilaṁ, if he drinks the water of grace. You know, it's a more humble, thank you very much. I really appreciate the clean water that hasn't been filled with fluoride and God knows what, female hormones, etc., etc., which might be the water of disgrace, the water of the water that the empire of evil would like us all to drink, so that there's less than 8 billion cattle for them to control. So there's 3 big ifs there. If abiding in an empty place, that's the first condition. He loves ever to be one. If he fools around with arisings of afflictions no more than he does with enemies, that's number 2. Not fooling around with what we shouldn't fool around with. And if going around enjoying his own self, he drinks the water of grace. So there's a subtext of humility there, isn't there? Because what we're getting to is talking about sovereignty over one's own self. It can't be a big-headed, proud thing. Being an individual, that Asphagorsa's pointing to, is not the kind of false sense of being an individual of a person who doesn't realise how dependent he is on blessings like water. So, but if we fulfill those 3 conditions, tato bhuṅkte, then in that case, tato, on those grounds, bhuṅkte, he enjoys, or we had it before in the sense of eat, to consume, but here it means to enjoy. Then he enjoys, śreṣṭhaṁ means more excellent, better than, greater than. Tridaśa, 30. Tri means 3, dasha means 10. So tridaśa, 30. And here the 30 mean the 30 gods in Indra's kingdom, or the 33 gods that Indra has sovereignty over. Indra is the top one. So pati means the master. So the master of the 30 means Indra, the emperor god, the supreme emperor, the wheel rolling king Indra. He's in charge of the other 30 gods. Then rājyād, Raja means kingship, sovereignty, dominion. So in Rājyād is ablative, so greater than dominion, sovereignty of tridaśa-pati, the master of the 30. So he's talking about the supreme, what we really think of as supreme sovereignty. Indra can do what the hell he likes. He's absolutely top of the political tree. He has got dominion over the other 30 gods. So I've added the word other, which isn't actually there, because I wanted to bring out the contrast with self in line 3. And then api, even, or emphatic. Sukham, I say prīti-salilaṁ go together, so it's usually joy and ease, or grace and ease. But here, again, I think Johnson translated it as happiness, and Linda Coville followed EHJ in translating that as happiness. So EHJ then he enjoys a happiness greater than the realm of the Lord of the 30 gods could give him. Which is more literal, and Linda Coville specifies the Lord of the 30 gods is Indra, so she translates, then he enjoys a greater happiness than that afforded by Indra's kingdom. Okay, they somewhat missed the point that Rajya means sovereignty, it means dominion over others. So it's not just about enjoying oneself in one's own kingdom, it's actually, as opposed to being sovereign over oneself in light of emptiness, what Asvaghosha is really describing. He's contrasting that with sovereignty over others. So this is the point. This point in human history, what we need is individuals, without being arrogant about it, without being too overconfident, not necessarily refraining from forming a community or network among themselves as individuals. We need individuals to stand up and be counted against collectivism. Whether they call it fascism or socialism or communism, Nazism, all isms basically have got a kind of an invitation, a collectivist aspect, a group thinking aspect. And ism is an ideology that people sign up to in a group thinking way. So again, the last verse of MMK, Sarva drishti prahanaya ya sadharmam adeshayat. He taught the true Dharma, the truth of what really happens, in the direction of abandoning all views, all isms. That's truly being an individual, or loving ever to be one. Has that sense of not signing up to an ism. So I've translated sukha rather than happiness. That sense of ease, I think, is important. So I translated, in this case, the facility. The latitude is another word I was thinking of using. See, in Shobogenzo, about shoyoku chisoku, wanting little and being content. He says, a man who wants little and is content, he has yoyu in Japanese. Yoyu means latitude, allowance, tolerance. Asvaghosha uses the word kṣama, tolerance. I translated it before as forbearance, but actually tolerance is a better word. Because if one abides in an empty place, that's what I was saying about Nishijima Sensei's generosity. See, he understood emptiness to that point, where he was tolerant and generous. But he wasn't so clear about it as we are now clarifying it. So then, the facility he enjoys. The facility he enjoys. You can do whatever you want within limits, within the limits of, thank you for the water of grace. So there's a freedom that comes from wanting little, or from humility. So then the facility he enjoys. See, if we've met those three ifs, then the facility he enjoys is greater than the sovereignty of Indra over the 30 others. So that, given my agenda to emphasize the importance of us making an individual effort, that's what my agenda was at the beginning of this, without even kind of hammering it by translating ego as individual, just by translating it more literally. That meaning is definitely there here. In light of emptiness, ironically, we become more separate, more of an individual. Even though emptiness is synonymous with dependent arising, there's a paradox there, isn't there? To abide in an empty place is not to other the other. It's to recognize the truth of dependent arising, in light of which one sees that one is totally not independent. One totally lacks any separate existence. But in light of that, there is a separation. It's a separation from clinging to stuff that are people other. It's a separation from clinging to objects in the object-needy world. Vishaya karpanam jagat. It's a freedom from the heart. How is it described? Jagati Vishaya Vyagra Hridaye. In a world which is at heart distracted by objects. It's a freedom from being distracted by objects, because we don't other objects in the first place in light of emptiness. So this is all about being a separate individual, ironically, in light of dependent arising. Because we can drink the water of grace on which we're totally dependent, then we can enjoy a kind of independence, a kind of sovereignty over ourselves, in which our latitude, our freedom to act, is even greater than the god of Indra, who's bossing around the other 30 gods at his will.